Okay, folks, we'll go ahead and get started. Looks like we have a quorum here. My name is Jamie Fogo. I'm the Dean of the Center for Maritime Strategy, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to the Center's first book launch today, the book entitled Returning from Ebb Tide. And just in case you're curious, we have a couple hundred copies of the book out on tables on the outside. When the editor and authors are done with their presentation, if you're interested, you can get a signed copy before you depart the pattern here today. And I have to say that today would not be possible without the hard work and dedication of Miss Angela Anderson and Jason Gosnell at Marine Corps University Press. What a great job on the layout and the publication of the book. I'm honored to have been on the editorial board of Marine Corps University Press for 5 years now. I started before I left active duty pro bono work, and I find that they are an outstanding publication house, both electronic and hard copy books. And you can also get the book and download it online if you go to the Marine Corps University Press website. Additionally, this book launch would not have been possible without the sponsorship of our friends from the Jonathan Engineering Group. Jonathan designs and manufactures highly engineered enclosures, slides, and isolators focusing on ruggedized solutions for defense, commercial aerospace, and specialty industrial markets, with a legacy spanning nearly 70 years. And if they're not on your ships, they should be. Now, just up here on the left is retired Navy Captain Mark Vandroff. He's formerly out at Marinette Marine. He's now working in town here as a VP for Fincantieri. Mark managed the Arleigh Burke class program, and Jonathan is on all flights 1, 2, and 3 of the Arleigh Burke. The gentleman sitting next to me is Matt Neushofer. Matt is business development at Jonathan. He's down in the booth. And I'd like to thank Matt for coming today and give him an opportunity to say something about his company and why they do this kind of philanthropic work. Matt.
Thank you, sir, for the opportunity to make such remarks this afternoon. A big congratulations to the CMS for the launch of this publication. It's our great honor to play a minor role in your significant contributions to the national security of the United States. My name is Matthew Neushofer. I'm the Director of Marketing for Jonathan Group, an American engineering and manufacturing organization that specializes in mechanical packaging solutions for electronic systems, from VPX and SOSA aligned chassis and backplanes to shock qualified and electromagnetically shielded racks and enclosures. Our products are specifically designed to protect critical electronics in all environments. We're downstairs in booth 415, close to the center of the show floor if you find yourself interested in our naval domain capabilities. I had the privilege of attending the sister launch of this book at the CMS headquarters 2 weeks ago and have since spent my downtime working my way through its chapters. The information contained within this volume is panoramic and protean. There is surely something for everyone in this work. Though all facets of the book's proposed operational architecture are critical, it's the book's third chapter, written by Brent Sadler, that closes by touching on an aspect of the strategy that hits closest to home for an American manufacturer, and that's workforce outreach and a labor development pipeline. Like many of you, we believe in communicating the greater implications of our day-to-day work with the folks who program the CNC machines, turn the lathes, run the lasers, and wind the wire rope. But we need a new message that inspires our youth to tackle projects aimed at resurrecting the critical infrastructure of our maritime enterprise. All this to say that Jonathan Group has been inspired by the conversations facilitated by the CMS, the Maritime Nation podcast, and the message that these chapters convey. If you or the organizations that you work for are compelled to do the same, please feel free to meet me down at booth 415 as well. We're actively looking for partners with whom we can engage the emerging workforce for this purpose. To some non-trivial degree, national security starts in the heart and the mind of the American, and it is our hope that by reminding our own labor force of their great impact and doing it more frequently, we can generate the interest necessary to sustain the initiatives proposed in this book. So once again, we're extremely thankful to play our small part in supporting the CMS, the Navy League, and those who defend the United States of America. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Matt. It's always a pleasure to talk to Matt, too, because he's well-read, he's interested in the classic literature, and a man that uses the term protean and panoramic in his metaphors is very impressive to me. So they're lucky to have you, Jonathan. As a plank owner of the Dean of the Center for Maritime Strategy, we opened for business in January of 2022, and the team had to decide what our mission statement was going to be, and so it's fairly simple. The mission is to strengthen American national security through its sea services by conducting policy-driven research, advocacy, and education on the relationship between maritime power and international security. And when we first started out, Admiral John Harvey, who many of you know, I know Mark knows him, was on our board of directors, and he's a quintessential nuke surface guy, ran CNP and Fleet Forces Command. And he said, hey, what are you going to do? You're probably just going to talk about submarines, aren't you? Because I know you. And I said, no, sir, no. And he goes, why don't you do something different? And that spawned the idea for this book. Do something different that will help the maritime services. It's not just the Navy and the Marine Corps. It's our merchant marine. You're going to hear from John Konrad about that today. And furthermore, Brent Sadler should be on the stage with us. He did the first book signing. He dared to come the night or the day after he was named as the new director of MARAD. This time the White House said, can't do it because you're in the confirmation process. But I couldn't think of a better person, one of our authors, who's going to be the new director of the Maritime Administration, and to really add some impetus to that for both shipbuilding and for our merchant mariners. So it was our thinking to do something different. We saw the commercial maritime industry atrophy for a number of different reasons. The peace dividend at the end of the Cold War, elimination of subsidies for the commercial maritime sector during the Ronald Reagan administration, and that's a Republican thing. It may not have been the right thing to do. China, of course, still subsidizes their commercial shipbuilding industry to the tune of about 5,600 Chinese flagged ships on the high seas. And then globalization, where we thought we could outsource everything. We found out that we outsourced our industrial base, not just for the maritime, but for other things too, and we regret that now. We're trying to bring it back. So it's one thing to lament the inability of our current maritime industrial base to produce aircraft carriers, warships, icebreakers, and submarines on time, on budget. Yet policymakers and commentators often ignore the atrophy of the commercial maritime fleet. This is the fleet that supported the Allies to defeat authoritarian regimes in the First and Second World Wars and ferried hundreds of thousands of troops and millions of pounds of equipment across the ocean to support Desert Storm and Desert Shield. That fleet is a shadow of its former self, and this book represents a clarion call to action. And our authors will tell you that today. Failure to revitalize America's once great merchant fleet will spell sure defeat the next time the United States finds itself fighting a major conflict overseas. And I'm talking China. We cannot afford to idly observe the status quo in the commercial maritime sector. And we have our editor-in-chief, Dr. Steve Wills, and several of our chapter authors here today to discuss the ramifications of inaction with you this morning. Steve is joined at the podium, and I'm not going to introduce everybody. I'm just going to tell you their names, and then he'll go into the bios. Vice Admiral Dee Mewbourne, newly minted PhD from Vanderbilt University, and arguably one of the best military SEA Lift Command commanders I ever knew while I was on active duty, and then he went on to be Deputy Transcom. Captain John Konrad, creator of gCaptain, which is an incredible blog, lobby, and John will tell us more about it. Powerful advocacy for our merchant marine, and decidedly so. Dr. Brad Martin, a noted author and contributor to CMS's work, and a scholar at Research Rand Corporation. Sabreena Croteau, Dr. Sabreena Croteau from Defense Priorities. She just finished her PhD at the University of Chicago, which is an outstanding school. And Sanjana Shashikumar of Core Power. And Core Power is an organization we've been associated with for a few years that are really pushing the edge of the envelope on small modular reactors. So she'll tell you about that, and so will Dee. Dr. Wills currently serves as a Navalist at the Center for Maritime Strategy of the Navy League of the United States. He's an expert in U.S. Navy strategy and policy and U.S. Navy surface warfare programs and platforms. His research interests include the history of the U.S. Navy strategy development over the Cold War and immediate post-Cold War era, and the history of post-World War II U.S. Navy surface fleets. Dr. Wills had a 20-year career as an active duty U.S. naval officer. He served on a variety of small and medium surface combatants. He also held shore-based assignments at the Defense Intelligence Agency, Joint Non-Lethal Weapons Director, NATO Joint Forces Command, Naples, Italy, my old stomping ground, and the NATO Joint Force Maritime Component Command, also in Naples. After retiring from the Navy in 2010, he completed a master's and a PhD in history with a concentration on military history at Ohio University, graduating in 2017 with his doctorate. In addition to his editor duties on returning from Ebb Tide, he's the author of Strategy Shelved, The Collapse of Cold War Naval Strategic Planning. Great book, highly recommend it to you. It was published by the Naval Institute in 2021, and he published, co-authored a book with Navy Secretary John Lehman, who's on speed dial with the center, by the way. He likes us and we like him, The book was entitled Where Are the Carriers? U.S. National Strategy and the Choices Ahead, published by the Foreign Policy Research Institute in August of 2021. I think that book's out of print, Steve, but you got more coming, right?
I hope so.
So if you want one, he'll send you one. Ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, let me introduce Dr. Steve Wilson, and we'll get off the stage. Good job.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I think we've got a terrific program for you here. And what I'm going to do is introduce to you the sections of Returning from Ebb Tide. And in doing so, and talking about the book, we'll also talk about each of the authors in turn. Once I do that, we're going to turn to our authors with sort of a general question, and that is, what's the most important thing from your chapter that you want the reader to take away? So each of the authors is going to talk a little bit about that. And then, as time permits, we're going to roll into exciting Q&A from the audience itself. We look forward to your questions. And then, as Admiral Fogo hinted afterward, we've got a table outside here. We've got a whole bunch of authors. We've got books. So if you would desire to have your book autographed by multiple John Hancocks from our authors, we'd all be happy to do that for you as well. So again, welcome to everyone. So, where did this book come about? As Admiral Fogo said, we were looking to do something different. Originally, we thought about doing this as sort of an educational primer on the wider commercial maritime industry. That didn't work quite as well as we planned. So instead, we decided to pick some focus areas, and our authors represent that here today. And the first of those focus areas in the book is sort of that troubled history of the commercial maritime enterprise over the last 50-plus years, and some would argue going back even further. And that's the current state of America's commercial shipping industry. And to my immediate left, our primary author in that section to kick it off, and our historian, is Mr. John McCowan. John is a long-term businessman and expert in the container business, and he began his career being mentored by the legendary creator of the shipping container itself, Mr. Malcolm McLean. John also has his own book called Giants of the Sea that looks at people like Mr. McLean and others that have influenced the commercial shipping industry over the years. So he's an outstanding choice to talk about the history of, especially the decline of U.S. commercial maritime enterprise. And then to John's left, we're also looking at potential solutions to how we fix this problem in this section. Admiral Fogo mentioned Brett Sadler's chapter about multimodalism. You can see that. But joining us here today from Core Power, as stated, Ms. Sanjana Shashikumar. Nuclear power has been poo-pooed by some and said too hard, too difficult, but it's been done in the past. Back in the 1950s, the U.S. Army had a truck-sized nuclear reactor providing electrical power for a base in Upper Greenland called Project Iceworm. So we've done this before, and the technology's better. So when you read Sanjana's chapter, you'll get more of that. So that's section 1. Section 2 deals with that vital relationship between the commercial maritime sector in general and the U.S. Joint Force. And there's no better person to kick off that conversation than Vice Admiral Dee Mewbourne, who has been obviously a career naval aviator, nuclear power trained for carrier command. He's been the military sea lift command commander and deputy transcom. So there's no better person to kick this off for us. And he wrote this chapter while he was finishing his PhD. So that's quite remarkable, and he's going to tell you about that vital relationship. Actually, we're really flush in section 2, because then to his left is Dr. Brad Martin. Brad is a senior, very well-respected scholar at RAND Corporation, retired Navy captain. He's written about surface ship operations, repair, and maintenance for a long time, and he's also made a lot of research recently into supply chain issues. He's really good, and I think you'll enjoy his chapter as well, that gets into details on sea lift requirements. Then immediately to his left, as stated, Dr. Sabreena Croteau. She's going to talk to you about other vital components of this fleet, the Ready Reserve Fleet, the National Defense Fleet, and prepositioning. These are all vital components of that relationship as well. And then finally, our anchor person at the end, John Konrad, who can say more, career merchant sea captain at multiple levels, multiple ship classes, and as Admiral Fogo said, founder and creator of gCaptain, and passionate advocate for the merchant mariner. Section 3 of the book is all about the people of the merchant marine and the wider U.S. maritime enterprise. We thought that would be the ideal third focus area. So John has written the opening chapter of that section that is a passionate history and advocacy of America's merchant sailors over time. So that's our roundup of how the book is shaken out. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and proceed to our sort of question du jour here for our authors. And we'll go first to John. And what's the most important takeaway that you want readers to walk out of here with in your chapter? Thanks.
Thank you. One of my favorite quotes is George Santayana's famous, "Those who do not know history are doomed to, condemned to repeat it." And I say that because I think the takeaway from my chapters is really the importance of history itself. Our merchant mariners, if it wasn't for our merchant mariners, we would not have won the American Revolution. As a first point of history. We all know also if it wasn't for our merchant mariners and the supply chain that they made possible, we wouldn't have won the war. Russia wouldn't have, we saved Russia with the Murmansk run. So I think history is replete with great things that our merchant mariners did. And history also reminds us of some of the things that we moved away from. That we need to change. My view is the famous writer Thayer Mahan. We were embracing everything he said about the importance of merchant mariners up until about the 80s, and around the same time we quit paying attention to it, China started embracing it. So history is telling us what we should know. Even more recently, a different type of large conventional war, but Russia's invasion of Ukraine, one is a reminder of the extraordinary importance of logistics, a whole different type of logistics, but Russia kind of blew it on that. But second, it's a reminder that big conventional wars aren't over. So for that, we definitely need sea lift. So that my takeaway is the importance of history and to know the importance merchant mariners have played in our merchant marine and how we need to start moving in a different direction. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, John. Absolutely, and it should not be forgotten that John Paul Jones's famous ships, Providence, Ranger, and of course Bonhomme Richard, were all converted merchant vessels of one type or another, and that's the beginning of our Navy. Let's go ahead and move there into the small nuclear reactor world. And Sanjana, what's the most important thing that you want our readers to take away from your chapter?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and I'm so happy to be here today. As he said, my name is Sanjana, and I'm with a company called Core Power. We are a maritime innovation company, and we're working on small modular reactors for the maritime industry. A colleague of mine co-authored this chapter, Thomas Davies, and our chapter is called The Savannah's Legacy, and it's advancing U.S. commercial shipping with small nuclear reactors. Now, the nuclear ship Savannah was the first ever commercial nuclear-powered vessel. It was part of President Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace movement, and she transported passengers and cargo for over 10 years, traveled 450,000 nautical miles, entered 45 foreign ports. And to answer this question about what's the most important takeaway from our chapter, it's first important to understand the importance of the global shipping industry, right? Responsible for transporting 90% of traded goods, it's currently dominated in East Asia, as Admiral Fogo said, with 95% of shipbuilding capacity in China and Japan and South Korea. These capabilities allow them to exert control on the market. And when we're discussing the renewal of the United States commercial maritime enterprise, part of this will need to include becoming globally competitive again. So on top of that, this challenge is coupled with fuel cost challenges, fuel supply challenges, vulnerabilities, decarbonization requirements from an international level. So in this landscape, our chapter demonstrates that the solution that can mitigate a lot of these problems is small modular reactors. So the United States is and has been the leader in advanced nuclear technology and nuclear propulsion, as demonstrated. And it's proven that nuclear doesn't have the same vulnerabilities that alternative fuels have. So there's no need to slow steam. There's much different speed considerations. You could have a reversal of shipping economics. So you're looking at low operating cost throughout the entire lifetime of the vessel. Our chapter also highlights that this is distinctly different from naval nuclear propulsion. The technology is not pressurized, but it would be operating at an ambient pressure, so you could shrink the emergency planning zone, make them commercially insurable, which is very important for the commercial industry, and the technology is walk-away safe. So American companies have this opportunity to bring this to the commercial industry, and the Savannah's legacy proves that it can be done and it can be led by the United States. So that's really what we hope people take away from our chapter.
That's very cool. Thank you. And you can all go see Savannah down in Baltimore.
Yes, in
right
Baltimore
now.
Harbor. She is there.
So you can take a tour. Okay, moving from there, let's move to the second chapter and that vital relationship with Transcom. Admiral Mewbourne, what's the most important takeaway that you want to highlight, sir?
You know, I had a chance to write a chapter on through the vantage point of Transcom, but I got to tell you up front, right, it was really through the lens of a career abuser of logistics. As was mentioned, I was a nuclear trained test pilot kind of guy. I flew off carriers my whole life, and then I had this opportunity to command Military SEAL of Command. And, you know, I just found out how little I really knew about logistics. At the time, or you know, about that same time, there was a guy, Admiral Swift, that ran the Pacific Fleet, and he was fond of saying that if logistics is an afterthought, so is victory. And I learned what he meant. And also, I heard adages, I guess, in my career, like logistics wins wars, things like that. And I thought logistics was ice cream, right? I mean, it didn't. As a carrier captain, all I cared about was, coming alongside the oiler, getting my fuel and supplies, and then seeing them next week. But what I really learned, right, was something that how important logistics are, right, to national security and how intertwined all of that is. DepSec DefBob work in 2017. I was the commander of Military SEAL of Command. He came to Transcom. And I'm sure he won't mind the attribution here. He explained the difference between a great power and a superpower, at least in his mind. And he said that a great power was a nation that had a strong conventional force that could influence other great powers, and it also had a nuclear deterrence. He said, but a superpower is a great power that also could take their army across transoceanic distances in order to compel another nation state. And that meant that the world only had one superpower, and that was the US, because we could take our army to war. So as I look back on the chapter, I would say probably the most important things you can remember are really written in numbers. One is remember 70%. 70% of our Earth is covered in water. And as a guy who spent 11 and a half years at sea in my career, I can tell you it's a big-ass ocean. And when you're, especially in the Pacific, and when you couple that with the fact that the next number is 85%, 85% of the joint force resides here in the United States. That's far different than back when I was a Cold War sailor. And we had, a lot of the force was dispersed in Europe and so forth, but not anymore. And so now you've got to take a city the size of Cincinnati, is what Bruce Bustler would say. He was at Transcom at the time. He would say, imagine that much stuff, and you're going to take it to war, and you got to take it on all of these ships, right? Then all of a sudden it becomes pretty important, right? 85% of that force will travel by sea. And it resides in the U.S., and 90% of what you're going to take to war, that's the other number, 90% will travel by sea. And in my chapter, I go through a lot of the numbers, and they're all in there for reference, but as high as maybe 95% in years past have we sent by sea. So those are the major takeaways, is that in order for, Transcom is responsible for the global mobility of things. The motto is, together we deliver. But when it really comes to taking the Army war to be that superpower that we are, we have got to have the maritime.
And sir, thank you so very much for that. And we appreciate Transcom's direct assistance to you in getting you numbers and things that you needed as well. That was outstanding. Let's keep moving, and we'll move next to Dr. Brad Martin, specifically sea lift. So, sir, can you tell us what's the most important takeaway from your chapter?
We're all going to die. No, the most important takeaway from my chapter would be that the United States has gotten used to the idea that it can build an iron mountain, it will be able to move things in an unimpeded way, and that all we really need to do in order to adequately support the force is spend enough money. If things don't work well initially, we'll figure it out. That worked okay if your enemy is Iraq or Korea. It does not work at all if your enemy is China. And I think we have found that there is a significant mismatch between our ability to move things and move them expeditiously and the level of threat that we're likely to face in the contingencies that we view as being likely. And in fact, a major point made in the chapter is that if we look at what are the movement plans and what's the force structure based on, well, it tends to be based on things that might have been valid 10 or 12 or 15 years ago. And I think that we have to move past that if we're going to be effective in dealing with the challenges that we know are going to occur. I make a particularly big point out of intra-theater lift. Transcom will get stuff to Guam. How you get stuff from Guam to places in the Philippines and across the first island chain is not well defined. And that absolutely must be addressed. I guess the final thing I'd say is if the United States has not done a real good job of mandating or sustaining its maritime heritage, there is a nation that has, and that is China. And if you look at China's ability to move merchant traffic through all over the world and the places it's established port facilities and where it owns things, it read my hand and took it seriously. So I think that is something that we have to learn. I think that we got awfully used to revolutions in military affairs and targeting is everything and all that type of thing. And I think that we have got a very big hole to climb up out of. I'll finish with one thing. I think the last 2023, the Chinese built 1,700 merchant ships. Anybody want to care to guess how many the United States made? John knows. It's like 6. 5. So the idea that we're just going to regenerate this stuff is fanciful. But I very much look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much for that. And as we said, this book is indeed a clarion call to action. And some of the things that Brad illustrates from his chapter represent part of that clarion call. Let's break down from the wider picture of sea lift into some of its more important component parts in terms of the National Defense Fleet and prepositioning fleets. And let me go next to Dr. Croteau. Sabreena, can you tell us what's the most important takeaway from your chapter? And thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I was invited onto this project by Dr. Martin, and it's been a really rewarding experience for me. With the Ready Reserve Force and the part of the Sea Lift Surge Fleet that is under the Maritime Administration and the Department of Transportation, one of the biggest things I think from my chapter is this sort of disaggregation of responsibility and accountability about who is going to take over the necessary revitalization of these programs. To echo those who've come before me, this is a very important logistics issue. And yet this fleet is, maintained and prepared for its readiness levels by the Maritime Administration. It then falls under the command of the Navy and Military Sea Lift. And its biggest beneficiary is actually then the Army, of course, because that's who a lot of the materials are being moved for. And yet, in each group seems to be only taking responsibility for its individual section of these issues, rather than coming together to collaborate and find a solution to the much larger problem that they all know exists. So I think that would be the biggest takeaway from my chapter.
And thank you so very much. That balkanization of some of these assets is indeed a challenge, and I think you'll see more of that as you read her chapter. As I said, section 3 of the book focuses on the people of the commercial maritime enterprise, one of the elements that we thought had not received enough attention in recent years. Someone who has given it a lot of attention is our anchor panelist here, Mr. John Konrad from gCaptain. John wrote, as I said, a very passionate history of the merchant marine specifically and its history. And I want to go to John and ask, John, what's the most important takeaway that you want readers to walk out of this room with from your chapter, sir? Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, and I am passionate about it, and I think Admiral Fogo might have a hook to pull me off stage if I talk too long here. So I'll try to keep this short.
Time, it's okay.
John Boyd, the military strategist, said it's people, then ideas, then technology. No one else. I am so excited about our shipbuilding resurgence and people like Jerry Hendricks in the White House and the Ships Act, which a bunch of us helped on. But I'll tell you something no one else will tell you. If we get into war, we have allied ships that we can use. We can arrest some enemy ships, but who is going to sail into battle? That's the question. And that is the merchant marine. And it's a difficult, is the merchant marine a service? Is it not a service? We were just talking about Admiral Rickover. And one of the things, I was on a podcast with Mark's friend, Commander Salamander, and Claude Roubaix, who is a biographer of Rickover. And my question to Claude was, part of what made Rickover effective in this government, where everyone promotes to be nice and we try to work along and we try to work with allies, is that his adherence to the truth, the hard truths, the painful truths. And I was telling Commander Salamander that, when I criticize the Navy, which I've been known to do on occasion, I get a ton of naval officers who come and they say, John, you're wrong about this, you're wrong about this, you're wrong about this. But when I praise the merchant marine, I get a ton of merchant marine captains who say, John, you're wrong about this, you're wrong about this, and you're wrong about this. And that's in our nature. We're more, we stand up, we tell the truth. We don't have, polished uniforms and things. We get the job done. And where does that come from? It comes from merchant mariners being at the tip of the spear in a lot of these actions. 2 weeks ago, a U.S. ship was hit at 16 knots by a Russian captain. Whether that was an accident probably or something nefarious, it was merchant mariners in this fireball of a tanker off the UK coast that caught fire. Prior to that, in the Red Sea, the biggest action day was when a U.S. merchant ship owned by a Jewish American was targeted by the Houthis a couple years ago. And that merchant ship that doesn't have seaways, doesn't have defense, was the center of the attack. Rewind to the Baltimore Bridge that was under the Army Corps of Engineers. They were in charge. The Navy was supposed to take a secondary role. I went to Baltimore. There was one Army guy in uniform, the colonel of the Army Corps of Engineers. There were about a half dozen Navy salvage experts. There were dozens of Coast Guards there, and there were over 100 merchant mariners there recovering, salvaging the bridge. And got no praise from anyone in the press. Go back to the boat lift to 9/11. You know, the biggest boat lift since Dunkirk. Those were merchant mariners on the tugs, on the ferries, clearing out Manhattan. And I'm sorry, my dad was FDNY and his whole truck was lost. But I bring it up because I'm passionate about it. And you go back, missing a Vietnam War, a Korean War, Merchant Marine was there all the way back to the Murmansk Run, where we had a higher casualty rate than any other service. And what is consistent on this story is unless Congress comes in and builds in the protection for the Merchant Marine, we're a secondary thought of the military. The military has put all of this effort into the joint actions, the joint affairs, and people joke that joint is spelled A-R-M-Y. And I get frustrated because we're laying up 17 MSC ships for a shortage of merchant mariners. Some of those are cooks. Why can't we bring the Army in and cook food for the merchant mariners and do some of these jobs? But this has real effects, this shortage of merchant mariners. And now that we're expanding, you will see merchant mariners in every theater in the world delivering 90% of military supplies. You will see them in shipyards around the world building aircraft carriers. They're in Chinese shipyards with the American Bureau of Shipping, inspecting ships there. This is an amazing, and these are guys who are out there in the field actually doing something. But when they come to the table, two problems happen. Problem number one is we're not necessarily nice. We ask difficult questions, and that upsets some people in this bureaucratic hierarchy. And number two is there is not a single merchant marine ship captain anywhere in the Pentagon, in any major think tank, and Rand is working on changing that. In any of the military establishments. Brent Sadler is a great friend of mine, but the last three, he's also commandant of the Merchant Marine. The last, I think, 6 commandants of the Merchant Marine have been Navy guys, some of them excellent, but we don't have a seat at the table, and one of the reasons is we're out there working every day, so most of us don't have master's degrees, we don't have security clearances, and it makes it very hard. You know, when they're standing up a shipbuilding office in the White House and people put in their resume, well, this guy has Navy War College, war game experience, security clearance. This guy just worked on the Baltimore Bridge. But this is the experience we need to get the rust off of ships, to get ships out in action, to get them built and down the slipways. And I think the Merchant Marine has been forgotten. And unless we bring them into the joint services, the war colleges, the logistics colleges into the conversation, I think there's a great benefit for this nation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. You felt some of John's passion here, and you'll feel even more as you read his chapter that introduces you to this wider business of how do we recruit, how do we train, how do we retain these people that form our Merchant Marine as part of our commercial maritime enterprise. All right, ladies and gentlemen, with that, I'd like to take some questions from the audience here. Now, you'll forgive me, the light is very bright, and I may miss you in the brightness, but let's kick off with Mark Vandroff. Sir, go ahead, please.
So, I am so glad you guys put this panel on. I'm so looking forward to reading this book, and the panelists have touched on 2 of my very favorite things. I have a question that I believe will be part A for Dr. I don't want to, how do you pronounce your last name, ma'am?
I'm Sanjana.
Okay. Sanjana. So for Sanjana,
Don't have a PhD yet, but we'll see.
She's working.
So I want to ask a small modular reactor question that's also going to dovetail into a question about training merchant mariners. Thin Can Thierry, we're known here in the United States for building ship, LCS, now frigate, but worldwide we're known for building cruise ships.
Okay.
And we're the largest cruise ship builder in the world. And I can tell you, our company has looked at small modular reactors for the cruise industry, and financially they make a tremendous amount of sense, and it's hard to get owners to buy into that.
Yeah.
One, because of the stigma, and two, because the regulatory training,
Yeah.
where do you get qualified nuclear mariners to run such a thing? So the owners that we sell to are reluctant, even though we could build on a ship that would have much lower operating
Yep.
costs across the life of the ship. So I want to ask you about kind of the, I'll call it the stigma of nuclear. How do you get it accepted?
Yep.
And I want to ask John, what do we need to do to our state maritime academies if we're going to have a large number of nuclear-powered, small modular reactor-powered merchant ships? What do they need in order to produce those third assistant engineers up to chief engineers in a regulatory environment that would actually be licensed to operate the small nuclear reactors? And those are my questions.
Great questions.
Yeah, great questions. So the public opinion side of nuclear and advanced nuclear is definitely a big part of this and a big part of this application. I will say the nuclear industry as a whole is working on bringing forward. Nuclear is going to be needed for all energy sectors and to meet all energy demand, and there's a lot of work ongoing to shift this public opinion to be accepting of it, and we have seen that interest in the cruise industry as well. I will say I'll share a quick personal anecdote. So a few years ago, over 10 years ago now, before I heard about Core Power, my parents went on a nuclear-powered icebreaker to the North Pole for their wedding anniversary. It was their vacation that they wanted to go on, and they came back and they learned about nuclear and they learned about how safe it was in marine environments. And I was like, oh, okay, you wouldn't really expect that at first. And so when I came across Core Power after, I said, oh, I'm very familiar. There must be hundreds of these everywhere. My parents went on one. And clearly that's not the case, but I kind of had a firsthand experience of somebody my parents are civil engineers. They work on bridges, but they had a very firsthand positive experience with these types of vessels, and that made me appreciate the idea before I even found this company. So I think public opinion is something that's being tackled and being worked on, and part of that is talking about the technology, part of that is talking about how it is safe. It is being designed to be walkaway safe and has ambient pressure, but part of it is bringing it to the conversation and bringing it into spaces that it's not there before. The more we talk about it, the more people are familiar with the idea, the more likely that the application can come to fruition with support from public opinion.
Thanks, Sanjana. John, do you want to address the training?
Yeah, absolutely. If you, 10 years ago, if you went into any nuclear reactor in the country, you would see a New York Maritime Academy grad, because we had a reactor at New York Maritime and a bunch of the schools built reactors in. Now those guys are aging out, but still during any major repowering of a nuclear reactor, you'll have some old guys who were there at SUNY Maritime because of that commercial application of it. The problem moving forward is, and if I wanted my chapter to be optimistic, but if I was being honest about the title of the chapter, it would be Broken Promises. So, recently as the Red Sea, we were promised secure communications, and we couldn't talk to the Navy because all we had was VHF radio. And then you go back to the Iraq War. My wife was promised these large bonuses and medical help for things like Gulf War syndrome. And those promises were broken. And you go through the history all the way back to our World War II veterans who had to fight till the 1980s to get veteran status, even though FDR promised them, and till 2 years ago to get the Congressional Gold Medal Award. It's a history of promises that are broken. So what does that mean now is when we try to do something like nuclear power, or we try to put things in the SHIPS Act, or we try to build more merchant mariners for MSC, everyone goes to the state schools and says, hey, will you invest in this? Will you take this career in nuclear power or everything else? And the sad truth is everyone goes, I would love to go to FIC into the area and work on nuclear ships, but I can't really trust the government. There have been too many broken promises in the past. So that means that the actual training in the future, the demand signal has to be clear, and it has to be promised. And it's the same thing as I think the shipyards are working on. We could say we're building 2 submarines a year and put that money into it, but then when we fall short, we fall back. And unless we can do that demand signal, and I think the best way to do that is bring the merchant mariners into the joint force, and we have to do a lot more liaison work. Merchant Mariners at Nuclear Power School would be a good start that we could get on very quickly.
Can I just add one thing?
Yeah, go ahead, sir,
Yeah,
please.
So I had the great privilege to command 3 aircraft carriers, right? So I sailed, using small modular reactors, right? And then one thing that now in the company that I'm the founding CEO of a company called Quadrant Nuclear Industries, one of the lines of business we want to get into is training operators for advanced nuclear reactors. And we want to do it based upon, sort of the principles of the Navy nuclear power program. I teach a course at MIT on the culture of the Navy nuclear power program to the Australian Navy as they're thinking about, or as they are, bringing the nuclear power to their submarine fleet. And I tell them that the most important thing, right, is the culture, in my view. And you've got to get that right. And if you do, you can continue to operate things safely. I think we've proven that with our, with our commercial reactor fleet as well. So to answer your question directly, there is a company that I know of, for one, that has their eye on that prize of training operators for small modular reactors, either land or floating nuclear power, or eventually maritime.
Thank you all very much for that. Certainly, the U.S. Navy's very safe record over 70-plus years in nuclear power speaks for itself, and translating that community to the civilian community that ethos would be most welcome. Other questions from our audience? Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anthony Fonseca. I'm a current chief mate in the Merchant Marines with a wonderful military salute command.
All right.
Mr. Konrad, Captain Konrad, you brought me to tears right now. I'm asking. The one thing I did want you to forget in history is the Red Sea. My ship, the Canala, we were in Charleston, and they sent us search deployment. They told our guys we were only going to go out for a week. That 1 week ended up being almost 8 months, and we were restricted out to sea. Missiles firing at us. So I was in the front, and we all finally, after a few months, finally got the recognition we deserved for that. But I have one question for everyone. What can we do right now? John got me fired up to get a seat at the table, because the time for talking about
Excellent.
China, like the whole thing of this conference has built up. I've been attending for 10 years, and these athletes here, these are all the troubles I have right now on a day-to-day job right now. Everyone, like, military school is doing right now. Everyone is like laughing because it's a laughing stock right now. We're down in Manning, and commercial Trump wants to drill the core power here, and all of that. To get to Chile, and John, I was a Ford Scholar graduate as well. The curriculum itself in 4 years is very compressed as is, so you probably have to add another 1 to 2 years in the training that you really need to do for all this. So the school for the state academies is pretty busy. The training right now, we're promoting people battlefield promotions. When I first joined MSC in 2014, it took 3 years to become a good student. Now, the battlefield promotions, you get the license, you're in charge of 100 people on rep.
Yeah.
But that's my one question. What can we do to get students?
Thank you, sir, for that. Let me go ahead and just compress that, and we'll let some of our panelists take a shot at that. How do we reorganize, perhaps, so that the Merchant Marine has a stronger seat at more of the joint force table? And I'll let John tackle that one, too, but any of our other panelists want to jump on that one and take a look at that? We could certainly consider that at some point. We've had other reorganizations. Admiral, go ahead if you want.
Yeah,
please.
I would only say that one of the things that I didn't know about, as I mentioned, the career abuser of logistics, but I didn't know about the SSO program until I went to Military Sea Lift Command. And I fell in love with that program. I tell you, it's amazing. And I then, when I was at MSC and then went on to Transcom, my aides, I would go out of my way to pick SSOs as my aides, because I thought, one is they've been around the world. They've managed problems that I think were far more advanced than maybe their contemporaries that are their age, and so they just seem to just know a lot and be able to provide support that others couldn't. The other is that that they could help advise me on, the maritime that I was trying to learn, struggling to learn as I was going through it. But I think that program, right, I did my part while I was in uniform to try to really bolster that program. But if we could get, I don't know why we can't have more SSOs working, in uniform and SSOs at the same time, right, in that program, right, that they work up and become senior officers and, command, and we should have admirals, I think, an SSO admiral in there, why not? And so anyway, I think that's a way that we could ensure that the voice of the maritime, and especially the mariners, are heard inside of, sort of military planning and operations.
Thanks, sir. John Konrad, you want to follow up on that a little bit more?
Yeah, I was talking at your panel yesterday. We got to get more billets in the command colleges so people are qualified and they have the degrees to do that. But on the other end, it starts at the very basics. So I've been pushing MARAD religiously. If you're in a combat zone, the Navy's getting combat medals. I think you guys are eligible for it. Some of the MSC has been issued it, but the guys on the MARAD ships have not. And a lot of mariners like, I don't want to medal. I want my family taken care of, right? But with that medal comes other things. Steve Wells has been in the Ships Act working group from the very beginning with a few of us. And I said from the beginning to Mike Wells, we don't have to give veteran benefits to everyone, but if you've been in combat alongside the Navy, let's give you the same veteran status as others. Unfortunately, that got whittled down to, but it looks like the GI Bill's still going to be in there. Another thing I've been talking Military Sea Lift Command, let's get rid of the word CIVMAR. I hate that. It's civilian mariner. We're merchant mariners. We have our own service, our own history, our own uniform at college. So it starts with those basics, saying thank you. The current admiral of the MSC had me in tears last panel he was in because he asked every service to stand up, and at the end, merchant mariners. So it starts with that basic respect, and then building it into the legislation on one end, and on the other end, it's getting in the joint force, and that's something that Army has to be at the table too, because they control a lot of this, and the Air Force.
John, thank you for that. We've got time for, I think, at least one more question. Sir, you were. Go ahead.
My name's Peter Dion. I have just a quick question, mostly about some of the functional aspects of it. So I should tell you that, at the risk of sounding cynical, I entered Maritime Academy in 1977 to head there. Graduated in 81, sailed with MSC in the 1980s. If you're out in Westpac, I was probably alongside one of your aircraft, or all three of them. And I've been attending things like this since I graduated. Talk about, revitalizing the merchant marine. I got to tell you, as I said, I don't want to sound cynical, but, the ships I sailed on are gone. The yards that built them are gone. As another person said, the time for talking about this is kind of past here. And we also talked about using small nuclear reactors, which I am all in favor of on merchant ships. However, if somebody wants to do that on a cruise ship, there aren't any U.S. flag cruise ships. So, my question is, what's the structural pieces that have to be put in place? And I would say, as an example, say cargo preference laws, some sort of modification of the Jones Act, perhaps give more flexibility for, any foreign, acquisition of ships. Because we don't have a facility to build up and look it up, that type of thing. What are those things? Are they in your book? Because if those sorts of things aren't there, then I'll be here 10 years from now at another conference, we'll all talk about things all over. That's my point.
Hey, I appreciate that, sir. Let me field part of this first, and then I'll give my esteemed chapter authors a chance to take their stab at it, too. All those things you pointed out are absolutely correct. That's why the book has the title, Returning from Ebb Tide. We are at that very far ebb tide. You can see the entire beach and all of its deformities and rocks and everything. We've come that far down. We agree with you. And we wanted this to be this clarion call for action. Now, I think you're seeing a lot of things that are taking place that are different from in the past. You have this bipartisan, bicameral Ships Act that has strong support from a number of significant members of the legislature. That's good. You've got an actual shipbuilding office within the National Security Council. I haven't seen that before. So I think there are some good signs. I'm not saying it's perfect, and you have every right to be skeptical. Everybody in this audience should be. Hence the name of our book. I've been asked already, is there going to be a sequel to your book? I said, I don't know. Is it going to be Slackwater, the failure to rebuild the American commercial maritime industry? Or will it be a storm surge in American shipbuilding? I don't know. But we're happy to be part of that conversation to at least ring the bell and try and get some of those things moving. Some of those things that you mentioned are within our book, not all of them. But let me go ahead and turn it over to our chapter authors to talk about that. Go ahead, John.
I think one thing that was very successful, one example, is the tanker security program. You know, a targeted kind of subsidy. And we know from history that the ODS program worked. The ODS program had all sorts of constraints. So I look at the tanker security program and some form of subsidy targeted at, container ships and LNG, you know, where that incremental cost is the smallest, but it's a small investment. And I think some sort of new government support to get U.S. flag vessels in international commerce. I think the priority, the most important thing to me is getting, more billets, because I think one of, as John said, kind of the broken promise, the biggest one is probably that people coming out of our academies, there weren't seagoing jobs. And, I think we need to turn that curve up, and that's a key thing we can do, I think.
Thanks, John. I'm going to let one more of my panelists have a brief last word, and then we have to move toward book signing in the hallway. So does any...
Can that be me?
Sanjana, go ahead.
I will just say, because you did mention the small modular reactor application, we're looking at part of what makes this application work is the American leadership. So you need regulators on both the maritime and the nuclear side. And the nuclear one in particular is the gold standard, carries the gold standard internationally. So we're developing the technology here. We can work with the practices that exist in the industry to bring it forward. And I can share that Core Power is working on pushing that needle forward already. That is a significant priority for us, and that's what we're working towards. So it needs to be American, it needs to be carrying that gold standard, and that's what will make the application work.
Thank you. And Brad Martin, you have put your hand up. You have the last word, sir.
I have the last word. Oh, my God.
You have the last word, sir.
We will not regenerate the world as we knew it 50 years ago. That is impossible. The U.S. industrial base has changed so much that we're not going to be able to do what we previously had been able to do. Having said that, we do have to recognize there is a national defense priority which goes with shipping, and we have to understand the dimensions of that. Once we have done that, we might be able to get back to having the discussion about how much and where and all the rest of it. Clearly, having better representation is great. Understanding the need is the most essential thing. That is lacking.
And thank you for that. And ladies and gentlemen, that's a wrap. Please join me in a round of applause for our excellent panelists.